Hello, cheeky dogs. Yeah, I didn't think I'd be able to do that with as much zeal and whimsy as the pink-haired Aussie girl lady or whatever she's called. Uh, anyway, I want to talk about Bluey and, of course, the um, some of the absurd overreactions that it gets, and how there's kind of some historical and philosophical background to this that needs to be considered. So, like so many adults, I watched Bluey, and having heard about it and heard that it's the greatest thing ever, and greatest thing since sliced bread, and this fascinating, deep dive into child psychology and healing your inner child and all of this stuff. And I resisted for a long time, and then I sat down and watched it, and I was absolutely transformed and transfixed. It is incredible. And needless to say, like anytime something wonderful and incredible comes along, we are going to, it's going to attract its haters and its critics. And it's again that thing where people tend to hyper analyze popular media, especially children's media, and kind of, especially people who have a hammer and view every problem as a nail. We'll get into all of that, but first I want to let you all know that my Patreon is back up and running. Patreon.com/JordanOwen42 if you'd like to support the channel and support me. Have not done any professional YouTubing in a long time, but I'm bringing it back just because I ran into some financial difficulties this year that hurdles that I need to clear, and I would like to work on clearing those, but also putting down some more financial padding, just so I'm a little more prepared when these things happen in the future. I'm already working 2 jobs. I'd hate to take on a third one or give up work that I enjoy doing to take on something that pays more. So you can save me from the Amazon fulfillment center by contributing to the Patreon. And again, that's patreon.com/JordanOwen42. So anyway, I watched Bluey and I absolutely fell in love with it. It is one of the most extraordinary achievements in modern, I think in modern media, and especially in modern children's media, for all of the reasons that have been discussed at length, and I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on that here. Suffice it to say, a decade or more ago, when My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic was popular, I got into that too. Up until a certain point, there was a sharp jump point for me later in the series when I stopped watching. But for a while, I was really amazed by it. In the case of that, what I liked was the background in mythology and the hero's journey and all of the structural, kind of all of those deep mythological structural underpinnings of so many of the stories and everything. Anyway, once again, we find ourselves, we find people that are just confused and aghast at the fact that there are adults that a a product of children's media, and somehow we can't get our heads around this idea that something could be work on a level that's appealing to children and work on a level that's appealing to adults. We don't seem to understand that there are creators who understand creating a program that is targeted at children while still having larger overtones that adults can appreciate, especially parents. We can't seem to get our heads around this, and it keeps happening over and over and over again. Every time one of these things comes along, we are just confounded and aghast to learn that there's a children's cartoonish thing that adults are loving too. Almost 75 years ago, we got Peanuts, one of the greatest comic strips of all time, surpassed only by Calvin and Hobbes, which is something else that children and adults have both loved tremendously. But with Peanuts, this tradition began. The humor in Peanuts works on the level of things that children will understand, things like sight gags and petty insults and jokes, those kinds of jokes, all the way up to these deep philosophical ruminations that adults will appreciate, but that children will just view as kind of odd and goofy and that sort of thing. It's one of those things with Peanuts. I grew up with it. It's one of my favorite things ever, and you can see all of the Peanuts memorabilia along the shelf here and all of that. So I'm a huge Peanuts fan. I prefer to say Charlie Brown or Charlie Brown and Snoopy because Charles Schultz never actually wanted to call it Peanuts. That's why when it was a TV series in the 80s, it was the Charlie Brown and Snoopy show. And so anyway, I love it, and I go back now as an adult and I read it, and I can appreciate just how much pain and sorrow and depression and anguish there is in these stories and these characters and all that. So it works on multiple levels. And with Bluey, once again, we find ourselves confounded by this idea, but it's happened over and over again. Things children and adults enjoy, things marketed to children that children enjoy, that adults equally enjoy. Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes, Harry Potter, Leisure Suit Larry. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, the thing is, we can't seem to get our heads around it, and invariably what happens is the scolds, the conservative televangelistic scolds and the woke scolds come along and start finger wagging at us because they both sides perceive it as failing us in different ways. And don't get me wrong, there are things that are there are things that are potential causes of worry for me, even as a Bluey fan. For example, we are now waiting with bated breath to see if they're going to introduce a lesbian family in season 4, because there was a blink and you miss it. There's a blink and you miss it reference to one character having 2 moms in one of the final episodes of season 3, and so people are waiting with bated breath for that because, while understand I have no problem with same-sex families with a character having 2 moms, I don't have a problem with that. Everybody just knows at this point that in modern media, portrayals of homosexuality are very often a carrier matrix for the woke mind virus to infect something. And all of a sudden, what starts out as this beautiful, joyous thing devolves into this depressed, angsty, irritated, perpetually guilt-mongering, shame-induced bore, that kind of thing. So that's what everybody's waiting for, is for to find out if they're going to inject all of that into this and turn it into another turn it into another vector for telling the world how shitty it is and how guilty it should feel all the time and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's beside the point though, because it's not beside the point, but I wanted to look at a different facet of that with this recent article that was published. TheBlaze.com published this article by Jeremy Pryor called "How a Beloved Children's Cartoon Turns Fathers into Mothers and What the Bible Says About It." And it begins with this. It begins, as the Western world catches collective amnesia around the profile of the historic father, we've begun to move past portrayals of fathers as the bumbling idiot of shows in the 1980s and 90s to a new kind of engaged, empathetic, and present father. There's only one problem with this new ideal father. He embodies almost all of the elements of the traditional mother, purged of the essence of elements from the historic father. The poster child for this new depiction can be found in the mega popular kids program, Bluey. The dad, Bandit, is seen as a constantly nurturing, always present playmate to his two daughters, Bluey and Bingo. He's so present, in fact, that fans of the show often joke about when Bandit finds time to work. And in the show, it's clear that the mother has less time to play than the dad. Our culture loves this depiction of fatherhood. It empties the father of all the elements of the traditionally masculine father we've grown uncomfortable with, and at the same time, it provides freedom for the mother to go out into the world and explore her individual passions. And he goes on from there. Now, needless to say, his understanding of the show is based on only a few minutes of viewing and some anecdotal explanations of what happens on the show. He did extraordinarily small amount of research to get this understanding of the show. Now, other people have already pointed out some of the problems with his interpretation of the work-home family dynamic on Bluey. First of all, Bandit works from home. He's an archaeologist and spends most of his time in his home office preparing reports and that sort of thing. So he is simply at home more than Chili, but that doesn't mean that he's a stay-at-home dad or some kind of liberalized leftist switcheroo of the traditional mother and father. He's simply, by virtue of circumstances, is there at home with the kids more. While Chili works at the airport, so she's out of the house more, but they are both working full-time jobs. And so that alone, if he had bothered to do a small amount of research into the actual series and actually get his head around it, would have put that to rest very quickly. But I don't think he wants it to be put to rest. Like I said, there are people who view every problem with, as people who have a hammer that view every problem as a nail. And it's kind of like one of the more ridiculous examples of this to come along in recent years was when Cuphead was accused of being racist. Why? Because it uses an animation style from the 1930s, and in the 1930s there were cartoons and animations that portrayed black people in a derogatory light. Ergo, anything from the 1930s that any art style from the 1930s or a modernized portrayal of an art style from the 1930s is thus a smack in the face to black people by virtue of that connection. And oh my God, that is so heinously absurd that I mean, God, whole styles of art are expected to be thrown out because, and the article, this is years and years old, but the article that made the rounds at the time about how Cuphead was racist and everything talked about how black people have to live with the knowledge that this style of art being used against them, and the style of animation being used against them, and Cuphead is being deeply insensitive. Like, dude, stop a minute. I really don't think 99% of the black people on this earth give a lot of thought to the fact that in the 1930s there was animation that was there was anti-black animation that was used against them, and thus are deeply offended by Cuphead by extension. I think this is probably something that begins and ends with the person writing the article. But anyway, the point of it being that there's this weird phenomenon where people start looking for things in seemingly innocent media to be deeply and horrifically offended by. And one of the great examples of that, I didn't find this out until I was an adult, but like so many kids, I grew up with the Berenstain Bears, a phenomenal children's book series, and one that is just, so aggressively wholesome and family values oriented that it is bizarre to think that anybody could find anything to get pissed off about in the Berenstain Bears. But sure enough, there's actually a whole demographic of people that, for reasons left and right of center, despise Mama Berenstain. Yeah, Mama Berenstain, the woman, the female bear, the mother bear in the blue polka dot cap and matching muumuu that is so sweet and lovingly compassionate towards her children, that she's just this symbol of love and nurturing support, and to such a degree that the early in the series incident where she tries to throw out all of her children's toys seems like a very a very poorly a point something that occurred during the very early stages of development of the character, when they really hadn't thought her through. It's very aberrant compared to the rest of it. She is so just so almost sickeningly sweet that it's hard to imagine that anyone could possibly take issue with Mama Berenstain. But people are infuriated. There are people that are infuriated by this character. And part of it stems from uh, the that there are people who view her as a conservative matriarch in the vein, or not even a matriarch, but a subservient conservative wife in the vein of like Phyllis Schlafly. Then there are other people who vehemently refer to her as this like revolting, off-putting manifestation of second wave feminism and all of this. And you're probably thinking of Mama Berenstain and thinking, what in the fuck are these people talking about? Well, a lot of it comes down to the fact that the Berenstain Bears had a book called, I believe it was Mama's New Job or Mama Gets a Job. I remember reading it as a kid. One of the ongoing elements of the Berenstain Bear lore is, even though the characters are frozen in time, they continue to expand the world of Bear County, Bear Country, and everything um, throughout the series. And one of the things they expanded to was opening up. Mama Bear opens up a quilt shop, so she starts her own business and gets her own job. And so, of course, the conservative Phyllis Schlafly types were screaming, furious, just blue in the nuts, angry at the idea that Mama Bear would forsake her sacred duty and leave to go get a job away from the home, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we run into the same thing that we ran into with Bluey, where they're saying, well, or we're running to here with Bluey, where uber right-wing Christians are saying, well, it emasculates the father and turns him into a stay-at-home dad. And again, the answer is no, it doesn't. The father is a professional carpenter who has his own shop on the property that the Bears live on. He works from home. He has a full-time job working from home. It just happens to be from home, but he's not a subservient, cuckolded, stay-at-home dad type or something like that. And so you have that flaring up again on the right. Then on the left, they took objection to the fact that when Mama starts working from home, she regrets the fact that she now has less time to stay at home with her kids and doesn't get to see them as much as she'd like, and misses things like fixing dinners and helping with homework and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my fucking God, people. Can you please understand that this is a relatively realistic portrayal of what someone who was at one time a stay-at-home mother that decides to open her own business might run into? This is not an indication that we are going off the rails on a crazy train, that society is going to hell in a handcart, and that all we're debating about now is whether it's a left-wing handcart or a right-wing handcart. No, it's just, yes, these are things you run into. And yes, it is totally understandable and realistic to portray a stay-at-home mother who opens her own business, lamenting the fact that she doesn't have as much time to spend with her kids. And, I mean, it is absolutely insane the way people act like the nanosecond something seems a little aberrant in animated children's media, things are going off the rails. And some of the best examples of this I've saved for last in this Peanuts collection. So this is a great kind of historical document of the evolution of the Peanuts comic strip over time. And it captures a lot of things and a lot of letters that Charles Schulz got, which, for example, when he introduced the character Franklin, which was the first black character in Peanuts, and let's be honest, essentially the only black character in Peanuts, but the first black character in Peanuts, that raised tremendous, sent up tremendous alarm bells for so many people, which seems odd nowadays, but in the 60s when it happened, when integration was still very much a hot button issue, it was very radical at the time. And so in here is the letter that Charles Schulz got from Universal Syndicate, the Universal Syndicate, saying, don't put Franklin in anymore. It's too controversial. We don't want it. And Charles Schulz said, no. I mean, technically the syndicate owns the strip and could put somebody else in charge of it, but it's like, again, it would be like putting someone other than Joe Brum in charge of I keep wanting to say Joe Brum or Jason Brum. Joe Brum is right. Whichever it is, forgive me, Brum. It would be like putting someone other than him in charge of Bluey. It's just not going to work. It's like when they did that abysmal final season of the Boondocks without Aaron Magruder. It's just not going to work. Anyway, so he called their bluff and they went along with it. But anyway, so the thing is, though, they have all these fan letters that Schulz has gotten through the years, and then they have all this hate mail that he's gotten as well. I want you to listen to this letter. Dear Mr. Schulz, what I have to say is said with love and as a Christian, underlined. Your comic strip of September 28th, 1969 is sadistic. You have thousands of well-meaning children reading Peanuts. It is sad that you must print a lie in order to get a laugh. Revelations 21:7-8. He that overcometh shall inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But for the fearful and unbelieving and abomination and murderers and fornicators and the print becomes illegible, and idolaters, and underlined, and all liars, and their part shall be in the lake of fire that burneth, the lake that burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. You are too good a man to print a comic like this one. Think of the price you are going to pay, and those you take with you. You know what comic this person was referring to when what this person was referring to? The lie that they thought was going to send children to hell if they laughed at it. The infamous slapstick gag of Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. He thinks we're all hellbound for laughing at the Lucy pulls the football away from Charlie Brown gag. Okay. Now, it gets better. This one, it doesn't even say what this is referring to. It says, Dear Mr. Schulz, it was widely rumored in the Christian community that you were a Christian. Were you? When did you stop and decide that the Bible was laughable? I am referring to the strip which mocked the sacrifice mandated by Almighty God for atonement in the Old Testament, which was a type of Jesus Christ's sacrifice in the New, November 24th. I'm wondering if you have been caught up in the New Age type of deception where vegetarianism mixes with Eastern philosophy and denies an omnipotent God in heaven who demands to be worshipped. Such philosophies make gods out of men with the lie that we can all find God within. Is this what happened to you? Sir, even if your personal philosophy is at odds with the majority of this country, which was founded on the Judeo Christian ethic, can you not control your urge to lead astray our little ones and proselytize instead your adult peers who can better defend themselves? Sneaking your anti Jewish, anti American philosophy into the minds of hapless children via a comic is just plain dirty pool. I would not want to be in your shoes on Judgment Day. Jesus Christ said that people who lead astray his little ones should be cast into the sea with a millstone tied around their necks. An apology is due America. And that's because, yeah, I mean, there's lots of overtly Christian humor in Peanuts, and this person thinks that if you are laughing at things to do with Christianity at all, then you're hellbound. You're immediately hellbound. You know, newsflash: Charles Schulz had, before Peanuts, had a short-lived one-panel comic that was nothing but Christian humor. And it's so amazing. We continue to do this over and over and over again. I think it's probably because we all, at some point, whether we have children or not, experience some kind of parental instinct kicking in after a certain point with children's media, and we start to worry about what those young minds, what Sidney Watson calls the pudding people, are starting to absorb, and what they're thinking, and what the next, what these lessons will mean, 10, 20, 30 years down the line when these people become adults and everything. And that's not for nothing. We saw what it was like for children to be raised on participation trophies and helicopter parenting, and the result has been the most neurotic, unhappy, entitled generation of whiny little brats we could possibly imagine, that kind of thing. So it's not for nothing that we wonder about what these influences are, how these influences on children are going to pay off down the line. The problem is that you're never going to find anything that gives you absolute certainty, because nothing can. And that's why we find people picking apart something as sweet and wholesome as Bluey, complaining because Bandit is too nice of a father. He's too kind and loving. He's not some kind of cold, distant patriarch that, some cold, distant patriarch that, demands subservience and worship from his family. Would you even want to watch that? Some episode of, maybe they'll do an episode, they could do an episode about corporal punishment. You want to see Bandit whipping his kids? This episode of Bluey is called Crowbar. I mean, it's just, no. And so somehow, this is a fairly recurrent, of all the things as you've seen here, I have problems with scolding people from the left and the right of the spectrum. And this is something that occurs too much on the right. Just like on the left, we have the extreme on the left is the indigo children that are, just allowed to run free range and get to tell the parents everything about how to raise them, up to and including what pronouns to use and all of that. On the one hand, you have that, and then on the on the right end of the spectrum, right wing end of the spectrum, you have this equal counterbalancing, but equally as problematic and equally as toxic perspective, where the father is this, cold elder patriarch of whose presence harkens back to the admonishing God of the Old Testament. And one of the things, and I say this as a Christian, but one of the things you have to understand about the Old Testament was it was laying down, you look at what's happening in the Old Testament, and it's stories of people being at odds with the natural world. And God is an anthropomorphization over and over again of the natural world and the horrors of trying to exist in nature when you had no modern medical conveniences or technological conveniences and all of that stuff. It was a world where you had to lay out a system of values for people that they would follow without failure, because the nanosecond they failed to abide by the values being presented, they were going to die. It's not like, it's like, why in the Old Testament does it tell you not to eat shellfish? Because no one, and they had no way of knowing who in the Old Testament days, they had no way of knowing who had a shellfish allergy. And if you did develop a shellfish allergy and go into anaphylaxis, which they didn't know what that was either, you were just going to die. They didn't have shit for you. And so all you've got is to tell, it's hey, we've got to keep our numbers up. Our demographic of the population could go extinct like that. So this shellfish thing is too much of a risk. And it's just on and on, things like that. That's why Jesus Christ is a revolutionary figure, because he changes he changes the locus of power within our worship from a worship that is expressed through fear of the natural world and a kind of overwhelming shock and awe at how horrible the world can be. It changes it from that to a concept of positive spiritual growth, that love and the interchange, the interplay of love in between people is what develops us spiritually and puts us on a new path. It helps us take a step up as a people. And so when we see things like this, all of that, the again, the cold-hearted elder patriarch that this guy is mad that Bandit is not, that comes from a world where a father had to be a father had to portray to his children a a firm edifice of protection, because he was the only protection that they had. And the idea, as we have evolved as people, we have gotten to a point where we now realize that living in this castle keep, living in some kind of might makes right, castle keep, devil takes the hind road kind of world is not desirable. It's not; those are not good values for prolonged life, or a prolonged human existence, I should say, and flourishing as individuals, as people. We've realized that there are better ways to conduct ourselves than being ready to kill at a moment's notice and that sort of thing. And so while, it's certainly worth attaining the kind of skills you would need to survive if you ever did find yourself in those situations, hopefully everybody in the developed world can agree that it's much more enjoyable and desirable to live in a world that is not predicated on fear and fire and brimstone and fury, that a world predicated on the exchange of love and positive values, and a world that first and foremost deals with its problems through diplomacy and empathy and that sort of thing, that these values are all superior in terms of the world they create. And, of course, I'm sure there are people who will pull up the soft men create hard times create hard men create good times create soft men, all of that stuff, that cyclical thing. Absolutely, that happens, and you have to be able to rise to the occasion. But I can tell you, as can so many people, that cold, distant father figure that this guy is advocating for, that does not necessarily bring about a happy, thriving, flourishing person. It can bring about deep-seated trauma and attachment wounds that get passed down from generation to generation. And it's a big thing on the right that, the more scars that your existence in life is like your character in life is chiseled out through all of the scars and lashes that you take throughout life, and it chisels you into a better person and that sort of thing. That's a very right-wing attitude we see coming out. It's one of the reasons, that's one of the reasons that the Gore novels by John Norman are so popular with right-wing conservative type readers. They love that. They love that might makes right, devil take the hindmost kind of attitude. And so consequently, that manifests in parenting that manifests in parenting as as this attitude of like, well, the child must start suffering as soon as possible and must be treated with this harsh, rigorous sort of attitude, or else the child will be soft and unable to cope with the world and everything. It's like, no, actually, it's entirely possible and actually very easy to push your child too far in the opposite direction and make your child a miserable neurotic that passes their misery and neuroticism down to their children, who pass down to their children. All of that. I mean, it's like the animated sequence at the end of Pink Floyd The Wall, where you've got like one person that's holding a marionette puppet of another person that they're beating and whipping, and then that marionette puppet is holding another marionette puppet, smaller one, that they're beating, and then and so on and so forth, and it just goes down the cycle. That's what you're getting out of that. And I honestly do not think that children are benefited by being taught to fear their fathers or live in terror of their fathers. I do think that a father's role, if you want to talk about, this guy wants to talk about the way people reject fatherhood and the importance of fathers and all of that. Stop for a minute, and listen. One of the things I'm always trying to do is get either side to stop and listen to itself. Like, stop and understand how what you're seeing over here on this side that you don't like is an equal and opposite reaction to what you're doing. Like, try to work on first keeping your side of the street clean. And so to the conservatives that push this tough as nails, hard-edged father, kind of, like a malicious Clint Eastwood type, the father that's the slumbering dragon that we dare not wake up yet lest he take off his belt, that kind of thing. The people who push this, stop for a minute and think about, why do you think so many people on the other side of the spectrum are pushing for this? Why do you think so many people on the other side of the spectrum are pushing for a world that downplays the involvement of the father and devalues the father and acts like fathers are a bunch of jokes that nobody has, that aren't worth our time? Where do you think they get those attitudes from? Why do you think they push that worldview? Because they've experienced the very toxic parenting that you are pushing for, the toxic parenting that you're pushing for, that you are advocating for. I'll give you an example. I saw a thing one time. There's a thing that was in the news, I think earlier this year or maybe last year, where there was a kid at some football game who had his face painted black and red because those were the team colors. And a sports journalist, saw that and took a picture of it and wrote about it, but they only got the side of his face that was painted black. They didn't see the other side, and so they accused him of going to the game in blackface, and they spread the kid's image and his name through the media and everything. And for 5 minutes, this kid's the poster child of racism and all of that sort of thing. And then you turn around and, oh, you dumb fuck, it was actually, he was wearing the team's colors the whole time, if you had just looked at his whole fucking face. And so that the issue was dealt with and resolved, but not as well as it should have been. I don't remember if the journalist in question was fired or not, but what I do know is I don't think there was ever there was some kind of reprimand and a retraction from the paper, but there was no, I don't think, proper apology from the person in question. Well, the journalist in question. Well, Matt Walsh famously, I don't know if it was how famous it was, but Matt Walsh commented on that and said that if somebody had done that to his child, he would have gone after that person in such a way that they would never forget. They would it would destroy their lives completely for having done that to his kid. He said that person, I would make sure that person went to sleep every day. That the last thing that person thought about before they went to sleep was wishing they had never done that to my kid, and that they would wake up the next day, and that would be the first thing that they would think about. And throughout the whole day, they would do nothing but wish that they had never crossed my kid that way. Okay. I totally understand on a visceral level wanting to go at somebody that way. I totally get it. I totally sympathize with it. I feel it. When I was listening to him say it, I felt it in my bones. I was like, yeah, I'm with you. I empathize with you, and I would want to do that to that same thing. But here's the thing. That is a totally unchristian attitude. It completely and totally goes against the principles of Jesus Christ. Where in what he said there was, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek, blessed are the humble, blessed are the poor at heart. Where was love thy neighbor as you love yourself? Where was turn the other cheek, do right by your enemies and turn the other cheek? Where was the spirit of forgiveness? Where was any of that? It's not there. And somehow the right wing loves to take Christianity and turn it into the bloodthirsty bastard religion. And I don't get that. Don't get me wrong. There's things the left does with Christianity that I think are abhorrent as well. I don't, I don't like the things where, we have I believe it's a Methodist preacher who gets up there and talks about how pride parades are exactly what heaven is like. That heaven is like one big pride parade that made the rounds, and that and they revamped the Nicene Creed to talk about a multi-gendered God who had who had an offspring whose pronouns were they, them, and all that. All of that stuff. That's taking it into that's taking things that are meant to worship God, meant to be used to worship God, and using them to worship worship earthly sexual proclivities. And I don't think there's anything wrong with those earthly sexual proclivities, but what is wrong is using the things meant to glorify God to glorify the profane and the secular. One of the few times in the Bible where we see Christ get really and truly pissed is when he goes into the temple with a whip of cords because of what was going on in there. It's that kind of thing. There's things all over the place. Like I say, the left and the right don't get spared. Whack-a-moles pop up on both sides of the board. But anyway, on the right, this thing has emerged where they've decided that Christianity is supposed to be the bloodthirsty bastard religion. That, going back to the Matt Walsh example, the real thing that is needed in that, the real thing that's needed in that, if that were his kid that had been wronged in that way, would be for him to arrange or him and maybe the paper that published that article to arrange for the journalist and his son to meet together so that the journalist could apologize to him and the son directly, and they could talk about it, talk out their feelings, reconcile, and then Matt Walsh could see the kids, Matt Walsh's kid could see him, except the kid would not really, at that young, would not really be in a position to fully comprehend what's going on, I don't think, but would see his father in a spirit of reconciliation and see that as the value. That is the thing of value. That's what he needs to see. Not this weird thing like that we see on the right-wing spectrum of Catholicism and that sort of thing, and much of evangelical Christianity, where the Mark Driscoll Christianity and that sort of thing, where it's the bloodthirsty, murderous bastard religion and that sort of thing. Um, that that idea is so antithetical to Christian values, to the meek humility of Jesus Christ. I see in Bandit Healer, and bringing this way back around what we originally started talking about, I see in Bandit Healer, although religion is dealt with only in the vaguest possible terms in Bluey, I still see somebody who, well, I say literally, in terms of literal acknowledgement of religion, uh, it's very vague, but in terms of the symbolism, there's tremendous spiritual symbolism, like the episode with the where they're taking things to the recycling compactor and everything. But anyway, so and that gets into reincarnation and spirituality and reincarnation and all that. But anyway, Bandit Healer is an extremely Christian father. He puts love first. And if you think that deprioritizing love because it might make people soft is a Christian value, you need a surgical proctologist to get your head out of your ass. It's just amazing to me. What part of this is because Rome fell under the sway of Constantine, and he adopted Christianity as the state religion of Rome, but it essentially revamped Christianity as yet another extension of the Roman values that Christ had sought to oppose. And consequently, that's where we had, hundreds of years of Christianity being spread by the sword, and that's at the point of a sword or at the point of a gun, and that sort of thing. And it is only by almost a miracle that the actual message of Christianity survived at all. And it survives in Bluey and in the character of Bandit Healer much, much better than it does in the minds of these apocalyptic assholes that want to, rip asunder their enemies and instill an aura of fear and of fear in their children, of their father, and things like that. No, fathers are supposed to be supportive, and they do contribute to giving you the template that you need to grow and function in the world. They are supposed to provide that. They're not, people like this guy can't understand the difference between providing stability and providing fear-based paralysis, basically. One of those things you can grow from, one of those things you can't. So, once again, we see extremists on the left and the right complaining and picking something apart in a way that it was never intended to be picked apart. If anything, Bluey is arguably one of the most compassionately conservative shows on TV. It is one of the few places where you will see a father knows best attitude. And the idea that the idea that the children are being poorly parented because they're seeing a show where a father is portrayed as nurturing and supportive of his children is absurd. There's a beautiful episode of Bluey where Bingo is having to deal with a bully at school, and her father, Bandit, is listening to her talk about this as he's taking out the trash each night, and the whole episode, the whole episode is told in vignettes of him listening to Bingo explain what this bully is like at school as they're taking out the trash, and Bandit gently guides her thought process, and then as a result of that, Bluey ends up making friends with the bully because she realizes that he needs a friend. By contrast, my grandfather believed that if somebody bullies you at school, What you do is you beat the living shit out of him every single time you see him until he's too afraid to be anywhere near you. You never back down, you never let up, you just keep pounding the shit out of him until, until he is just running from you, running scared and terrified from you. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there are psychopathic people out there that understand nothing other than action. They understand nothing other than physical force. I know those people are out there. But it is crucial for the development of a child and for the development of a functioning human being that is not your first and final priority in how you deal with people. Striking fear in the hearts of the world around you so that everybody is terrified of you and, bowing down in your presence is not a healthy way to behave. It's not a healthy way to raise up a person to automatically go to apocalyptic rage as their default. That is not good. I love my granddad, and he was a Christian, but that troubles me. Those values trouble me. That's not Christian. That's not in the spirit of turning the other cheek. And so, as I was watching another video talking about this article, and somebody responded to it and said, when right-wing Christians reveal their attachment wounds. And that really is what this is. I really do think at heart the guy that wrote this article, if we could crack him open, what we would see is somebody who is hurting for real nurturing support from his father. He would probably deny it up and down. And I'm not saying this to cut him down or insult him, it's sad and it's very unfortunate, but we would probably find somebody that was hurting for real nurturing support from his father, and sees it, reacts resentfully because his attachment wounds what he thinks is building character is telling him to think, oh, well, this is teaching people to be a pussy, because he associates wanting love with punishment, as he associates wanting love with weakness. So, hopefully, somehow, some way, we can all just learn to appreciate Bluey for the beautiful, wonderful miracle that it is.